The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Keep your mission on your mind and your mind on your mission. This is Mission Minded with Michael Coleman.
Welcome back to Mission Minded. Keep your mind, your mission on your mind. I never get tired of saying that, Michael. It's Michael Coleman, CEO of the Heart of Alabama Food Bank. It's our second show of 2025. I'm Tony Kurre. He is Michael Coleman. They do wonderful work down there in Montgomery, covering 35 counties in the great state of Alabama, working with Feeding America and helping all kinds of folks. We do a couple shows here. We do Bite by Bite, which is a show that's specific towards the Heart of Alabama Food Bank. We'll do that show, and it runs right after this Congruent. So we've got that show. And then on this show here, we talk about business. And certainly we talk about non-for-profits. We certainly talk about Feeding America and other great things that Michael's been doing throughout his illustrious career. He's got great testimony there. But something hit me today, and we were talking about, I heard something about SNAP or food stamps or something. And of course, it's the new year and everyone's trying to get, off to a good start. And, we have New Year's resolutions. And, I think it's the second Sunday of January is called Quitter Sunday or something. It's by by the second Sunday of January, we're already done with our New Year's resolution. We've scammed it. We're done with it. And hopefully that doesn't go for our listening audience. But something I don't really think about, and I shared a story on this show about, you had thrown out a stat that 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 school children in the state of Alabama are hungry. And when I said, what do you mean hungry? I mean, all kids are hungry. My daughter eats nonstop. She'll eat dinner, and then 5 minutes later, she wants a snack, and no, they're in need of food. They don't have enough food to eat. They don't have enough food to eat nutritionally, substantially. They just don't have it. And that just seems like, wow. Which means that, in my daughter's class of 20, there's 4 or 5 children there that aren't getting breakfast. That aren't the only meal they probably eat is probably at school. Right. And we saw that after COVID, we had the free lunch thing, and some schools continue to do that. Some didn't. But, during the summertime, a lot of parents have a hard time dealing with that because they have to feed their children 3 squares a day or 2 squares a day, depending on when in school, they know they're getting that meal. And I had a friend of mine, his daughter came over to our house to spend the night, a couple of nights with my daughter. This was about a year ago. And of course I said, such and such, what do you usually eat at home? And she said, we open the refrigerator and we dive in. And I kind of laughed and I said, so we do that once in a while too, right? We have leftover stuff like that. But I said, what do you like to eat? I mean, what do you like to eat? And she said, well, we do mac and cheese and cereal and things like that. And it didn't sound like anyone. And I'm not a perfect parent. If your parent doesn't want to do frozen pizza 7 days a week, you knock yourself out, brother. I've been there, done that. But I did find it funny though, because about a week later, she said to my daughter, she said, man, your dad loves meat. And she said, what do you mean? She goes, he eats meat with everything. I mean, everything starts with meat. It's like, okay, we're having pork roast and then we're having, broccoli and salad and blah, 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 or we're having hot dogs or we're starting with meatloaf. She's like, gosh, you guys must kill a lot of cows. You eat a lot of meat. And I do like meat. I mean, I've never been a vegetarian. I love meat. But I mean, that's the way I was brought up. What meat are we having? You centered your meal around your meat. Yeah. That's the way we were brought up. And so that just kind of told me that she just doesn't eat a lot of meat. And it's probably because meat has protein and protein costs money. So I just kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about not only the effect that obviously you guys have in trying to help feed people that are insufficient that area, but also the children that come along with those families. We talked before the show, what percentage of families that use food stamps or SNAP in the state or use your services have children?
It's a tad under 50%, but you could just say roughly 50% of people who receive SNAP benefits have children in the home. And really, when I think about the children and the issues that they have going on, it's really what drives me even more so than adults, because an adult lots of times can reason, can understand, can make decisions in poverty, and to be able to get by. But a child, it really has much more of a dramatic effect upon a child long term, and it really is a childhood trauma. And so we're trying to really focus on that aspect of the children because we understand that food scarcity leads to all sorts of other issues. And that's just what the research proves. But a lot of it is just common sense. So I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take kids. It probably would not be a surprise to anybody that kids who are hungry or who do not get fed regularly or who do not get fed enough protein, or, like I said, if you're just eating mac and cheese all the time, or you're eating processed food that's out of a box. Look, I'm the world's greatest offender of that. But as a child, and you're not getting proper nutrients, or you're not getting enough where your stomach is hurting because you're hungry, imagine the challenge, especially in poverty. You can have all these other challenges anyway, but one of the greatest challenges is just academic achievement. Any of us who sit down to do work, we might sit down with a snack, we might sit down with a cup of coffee, we sit down with whatever our comfort thing is, and we can really lock into work. But how many of us, even as adults, can't lock in and focus because, man, I'm hungry. I just got to get something on my stomach. Well, imagine feeling that. But as a child, you don't have the ability to go out and run down to the corner. You may not have a dime in your pocket, so you're not empowered to do that. So now you're just left with that. And that scarcity, it doesn't just affect your ability to think. You're in the middle of growth cycles, and your brain needs those nutrients. Your body needs those nutrients. So not only is it affecting you in the now, but it's going to affect you long term, both physically and psychologically. And all that plays out with all the different issues. So, there's lots of stats that prove the effect. And it's something that most of us just don't think about. It's not that I think that we're indifferent, like we don't care, like we know that problem exists and people just don't care. The average person, let's say a blue collar person, goes to work every day. Look, they got their own struggles to put food on the table. They're fighting for their family, and rightfully so. They got enough troubles of their own trying to make these ends meet. They don't have the resources or the ability to invest in those who need more. They're barely getting by themselves oftentimes. But then you've got middle class, upper middle class, wealthy class, or whatever. It's not that they're indifferent, but oftentimes they've never walked in that space. So when you've always had an abundance, or you may not always had what you wanted. That was me growing up, and that's still me today. I may not always have what I want, but I always have access to food. Well, then that's how you tend to approach these issues. And you don't think about a world that's totally different. Or if we do, we tend to think about, that's in Africa or in South America in rural areas where there's, poverty and, $2 a day to get by, those kind of things. We tend to project that very far away. And the reality is it's very near and dear to a lot of our kids. And our kids see it every day, especially those who are in public schools. And it's just a reality that exists every day. And most of us are just don't face it or just don't encounter it. I think if we did, there would be more involvement from the community addressing these issues and getting involved in these issues.
Do you have any research on, this is probably a lousy analogy, but I know that, when you have some type of sexual misconduct in a family, you need to stop the cycle, right? Is there any cycle that goes along with being hungry as a child? Is there a pre-genetic disposed thought process of like, if I went hungry, my children are going to go hungry, or does that play out? Because that's the new norm, right? You call it the new norm, right?
Well, So a lot of it, there are a million different variables and factors that play into this. I will tell you that generational poverty, and that's defined as 2 consecutive generations who live at the poverty level or below. What begins to happen is they kind of fall out of mainstream ideals, practices, and you just kind of get in this survival mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you're a snap and you raise your children, and your children tend to replicate what they see because that's all they've ever seen. So, and that goes all into behavior. That goes all into, there's very little problem solving. It's a lot of crisis management and not effective crisis management. When you're raising kids, there's a lot of yelling. There's a lot of, there's just not what we would say. There's not an education level of how to maybe parent the best. They're probably doing the best they can oftentimes, but people in generational poverty tend to not be as educated. They don't keep informed on the latest parenting. They don't, when they scroll the internet, it's a lot of entertainment. It's not a lot of self-improvement type of things.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see is the neighborhood, your family that you have, and the neighborhood around you, which you tend to see these, and you see these lots of times in housing projects. And so like in Alabama, there's housing projects up north where there's not a lot of African Americans, and the housing projects are all white. And you see this amongst white community, white poverty, black poverty, Hispanic poverty. You're just going to replicate the same things that you see. And when you start talking about, it affects your physical health, but it also affects your mental health. When you then go to school or you go over to a family's house who is not in generational poverty, it's like a whole new world. Like, like somebody asking you, you meet me, because that's something that they don't see. And so they don't get exposed to the other things. They don't get exposed oftentimes to new ideas and different ways to live. And so when you're living in generational poverty, they just replicate that same thing. They tend to remain on government assistance. They tend to have children out of wedlock. They tend to, at an early age, they tend to not possess the skills that are necessary to work anything other than minimum wage jobs. They don't tend to marry and stabilize a home. And they tend to have a higher rate of mental health and behavioral issues along with it. And so like I said, there's a whole lot of factors that go in that, but food insecurity is certainly part of that issue that plagues generational poverty.
Well, I have Michael Coleman. He's the CEO of the Heart of Alabama Food Bank, Feeding America, of course, one of the wonderful entities they help. And of course, we also do a show called Bite by Bite, which comes on right after this. You can get the show at least 5 days a week on the Tony Curry Radio Network. Thanks to the 100,000 folks who have downloaded the app. And of course, wherever you get your favorite podcast, you can watch right here on our YouTube channel. I watch a lot of history shows, a lot of documentary shows and stuff. And I remember back in the Depression days, and certainly when times get really tough, the children would quit school to go to work so they could raise money for the family. Does that still happen?
No, because I will tell you. So let's take people in poverty. And for this example, I'm going to specifically look at the African-American community. There are pictures that you see from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even into the 60s, where the vast majority, and research plays this out, and Thomas Sowell, who's an African-American at Stanford, at the Hoover Institute, he has written several books about this. He has documented all the research, brilliant man. But he has talked about how that when you look at the families, they may have been standing by a shack that was their home. I mean, you're seeing real poverty, but you almost always saw a mom and a dad and their children, and they had values that were taught that were a core part of that community.
Mm-hmm.
And then but the governmental attempt, I've addressed this on other shows, but on the government's attempt to do something about poverty maybe they were well intentioned, but what they ended up doing was saying, I will give you money, but I'm not going to give you money if a man's in the house. It's for divorce or single mothers and all that. So in order to, they're offering this great benefit, but it basically chased a lot of men out of the house. And then you see generational now that's just kind of become ingrained in our culture to where, and again, this is not just in the African American community, but it's it's white poverty as well. You get a girl pregnant, it's like, well, no big deal. I'm just going to keep getting girls pregnant because they will get Medicaid will pay for their baby to be born, so they don't have any hospital expenses. They'll get food stamps, they'll get WIC, and they'll get welfare to take care of the wife and children. So there's no ownership in that. And I will tell you that was not the African-American households back in the 60s and 50s and 40s. They were rock solid and they had generational impact. And a lot of that was lost because of the effect of government. I'm not saying that was the government's intent. That's just a result. And that's why you see now 7 out of 10 African-American children are born out of wedlock. And statistics have proven that the best thing for a child, for any child of any race, is to have a 2-parent family. Now, I know there were times I was raised, my mother went through divorce. There was times I was raised just by my mother. Those things happen. But when they replicate themselves generationally, the children are starting from so far behind and they have so many barriers to overcome that it's rare now that people are able to come out of this when they're living in actual generational, where you have 2, 3, 4 generations now that have only known poverty and dependence on government. Whether you're white, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Black, it makes it incredibly difficult to come out of that. And that's one of the effects of it. And so much money and so many people, and I've been a part of this for years and years and years, trying to take one person at a time and say, let's lift you up out of this. Let's create a pathway for you to come out, because on your own, you're just going to continue to replicate what you see. That would be any of us. If I only see one example of everything I do, whether it's good or whether it's bad, I'm going to follow that example. You have to create pathways where people who don't want to live that are willing, have the ability to get the education, to get the resources needed, to get the relationships needed, all of that to come out of that. And there are people who do every day, but it's not in bulk. It's the one here and one there, and it's a huge challenge. But going back to our original subject was the effect on children. And so you see mental health issues are higher in poverty. Housing instability is another factor. There's just so many things. And I've seen adults who grow up with food insecurity and that food scarcity. And you can see they're always worried, obsessed about where their next meal is going to come from. And that's just from the childhood uncertainty of growing up, going from meal to meal, not knowing is there going to be enough to eat. And if it's not addressed through counseling, or they don't learn healthy coping mechanisms, they'll deal with it the rest of their life, regardless of how much they have.
Yeah. What do you say to someone who says, if you can't afford it, why are you having one? Why are you having children? I've adopted two my sons from Guatemala. They have a keen little thing going down there now where the lawyers are actually in cahoots with some of these mothers, and they're paying the mothers to get pregnant because she's going to get some money and she's going to get her 10 grand. He's going to get his 10 grand, and she's like a little baby machine, and they're putting more people on this earth than we know what to do with. And it's sad, and but that's just the truth. I mean, it just happens. I'm not saying it happens for everybody. And I remember having this conversation. It's the funniest thing, because I'm thinking about my father for some reason, because I remember asking my dad the same question when I was 6 or 7 years old. I'm like, Dad, if they can't afford to have these babies, why do they keep having these babies? Why do you see these mothers that have 7 children if they can't take care of them? What would you say?
Yeah, it's a very delicate subject. I look at myself who I think I've been very honest. I married my wife back in 1984. She was a high school cheerleader. She became pregnant, and we got married because at the time, there wasn't a lot of baby mamas and baby daddies. What you did was, at least in where I was from, you got a girl pregnant, you should marry her. That was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And but how does that come about? Because you've got two 18-year-olds who are not mature in their thinking, don't understand consequences and all of that. And they are doing what, hormonal teenagers do. That's in some part. But then after you did that a couple of times, you're like, well, you would expect it to. But see, there's really no, because we overall, we do live in a compassionate society. We wouldn't want anybody to get pregnant and then we tell them, no, we're going to not pay for the, that's what Medicaid does. We're not going to pay for the child. We wouldn't do that because that would endanger the child. And we come from I'm a pro-life person. We wouldn't want to do that. It is very frustrating when people make decisions that affect the family dynamic that's ultimately going to hurt the child. When you're not financially capable of bringing a child into the world, you're starting them behind, even if you love that child with the best of your love, they're going to run into all sorts of extra barriers because of poverty. And, the problem is we're kind of stuck in this, well, I'm free to do whatever I want to. Freedom in America. Yes, you are. But then somebody gets pregnant, even though it's not in their best interest. You hear people talk all the time about, well, let's put a limit on how many children Medicaid will pay for. Mm-hmm. So let's say you pay for 2 children. All right. Then she gets pregnant with a third. And Medicaid is saying, we're not going to pay for that. Well, now what's going to happen? She's going to probably go out of state and get an abortion, or she's, how is she going to pay that hospital bill? She might do it. So I'm just saying it's an incredibly complex issue. We would hope that through education, we can inform people to make better decisions. I remember growing up as a young believer and churchgoer, when they talked about schools handing out condoms, I was outraged because I thought, well, you're just promoting sex among teenagers. And I'm sitting there thinking, now at 59 years old, what a great idea, because because teenagers are going to do what teenagers do. I mean, look, I would like to say it's wrong, and I can say it's wrong. I can say it's not a good idea, but that's not going to change the reality. The reality is they're doing it. And so would that slow down pregnancy? Would that slow down sexually transmitted diseases? If so, all of that's a good thing. Yes, there's moral issues to consider, but the idea of just pretending that teens aren't doing that and that all these babies are coming along, well, we're really hurting the babies long term with not dealing with these issues. But in our conversation, I'm kind of feel like I'm all over the place because there's so many layers to it. No, you could look at it from the parents, you could look at it from the child, you could look at it from the community they exist in, the school system. There's just so many things going on. And what we're left with, unfortunately, are adults who can't take care of themselves, children who are traumatized, and organizations like us and individual citizens like yourself who deeply care and want the best for all of our citizens we love white, black, poor, middle class, wealthy. We love all people and we want the best for everybody. But getting there sometimes is a frustrating exercise and a heartbreaking exercise.
I think when I asked my dad, why do they keep having kids? I think my dad said, well, they're bored, hon. And I think I was like, oh, and he's like, well, my dad had a little Archie Bunker in him, but he was like, well, what are they doing?
I just posted a meme on my Facebook that said, I wonder what my parents did for entertainment back before computers. And I'm like, let me go ask my 18 brothers and sisters what they think.
Yeah, they were bored. I mean, what was it? I mean, it feels good. Sure. I mean, let's say, what do you say?
But the white community, if you think about it, if you look at Appalachia, and so we're not talking about just, I mean, we're talking about, we're eating possums because there's nothing else to eat. They would have huge families.
Oh, yeah.
And you could tell them.
And wanted huge families.
And you could tell, because lots of times it could help out on the farm or do other things. But lots of times, they were killing animals just so they'd have something to eat. Mm-hmm. So again, I don't want to portray this, that this is because you have history with Appalachia and the different regions that affects, and the white community and how deeply entrenched they are, and they replicate that same thing generation after generation after generation. So people are people. You have specific things within each racial community or ethnic community, I should say, but yeah, people are people, and yet here we are saying we're still going to love them, we're still going to show compassion.
It's not their fault.
Yeah, but it's frustrating, yeah. Especially when we see little children who can't learn like they need to, don't have the resources they need, are destined for more of the same, and that's heartbreaking.
He is Michael Coleman, Heart of Alabama Food Bank, the CEO down there, and of course I'm Tony Kurre. This is Mission Minded. We do this show every single week. It's a great show. Go back and listen to our archive shows. We've got some fantastic shows. We've been doing them for several years, and of course another show coming up here next. If you're on our TKR network of stations and podcasts right now, it's called BBB Bite by Bite. We'll do it next right here on Tony Kurre Radio.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.